This cannot be happening yet again. There was a firestorm on the news after Elon Musk at a cabinet meeting said this.
I'm excited to announce that we anticipate savings in FY26 from reduction of waste and fraud by $150 billion.
Now, don't get me wrong. $150 billion is a lot, but it isn't the $2 trillion and later revised down to $1 trillion we were all hoping for and that Elon Musk seemed confident we could actually get to. So what is actually going on here? Is this just yet another politician playing this bait and switch game where they overpromise and massively underdeliver, or is there something else going on? Well, like always, we will start our search by going to Ground News, where we uncovered this headline titled, Elon Musk scales back DOGE savings target by 85%, which is facing a conservative backlash. Now, as you can see, the left is highlighting that Elon Musk has significantly lowered his savings target, and that according to them, recent audits have revealed that fraud within federal agency payments is, quote, extremely rare. Okay, we'll see. Meanwhile, on the right, they're even mentioning that some of Trump's supporters, like Stephen K. Bannon, are arguing that while the cost-cutting efforts are correct, attaining the $1 trillion in savings is doubtful. Now, I can dive into this story further because Ground News provides me with a ton of articles that have been published on this particular topic from multiple perspectives. Now, remember, Ground News is both a website and an app that gathers related articles in one place so you can compare headlines, helping you to understand not just what's happening, but who's telling the story and why. So if, like us, you are somewhat frustrated with the way that typical search engines curate the news where you only get one perspective until you get to like page 12, go over to ground.news/Doge and check out all the different features they provide. In fact, if you go over there right now to ground.news/Doge, you can get 40% on their Vantage plan, bringing the price down to just $5 a month for unlimited access to all of the features you need to keep track of everything that is going on, both with Doge and beyond. Let's get back to the story. So it looks like that both sides are sufficiently frustrated with this latest announcement. And honestly, yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Because Musk at a rally at Madison Square Garden had originally suggested that upwards of $2 trillion could be cut. And I was pretty thrilled about that. It was later revised down to $1 trillion for fiscal year 2026. But now it seems as if we're revising it down again to $150 billion, which corresponds with what the DOGE.gov website has uncovered and what they're categorizing as either fraud, waste, abuse, or general errors. Now, the Washington Post has said that recent audits have shown that fraud is actually exceptionally rare. Okay, well, I'm not sure how recent those audits are because an audit that was done by the GAO less than a year ago had suggested that there is between $230 and $500 billion lost out of the federal budget due to fraud, waste, abuse, and errors, not to mention things like wrongful payments that are made annually and never recovered. So why is there this drastic shift in fiscal year 2026 projections? Well, let's look at a couple of things. First of all, I'm not thrilled by this, but I am going to try to be fair. What Elon said was what was projected to be cut from fiscal year 2026 as a result of fraud and waste. So let's be generous for a moment and acknowledge that DOGE has had less than 100 days to actually look at the behemoth that is the federal government. It's also understandable that not all fraud or waste is ever going to be completely eradicated from the process. Let's also acknowledge that some of what the Department of Government Efficiency is trying to do is update systems which will prevent fraud and waste in the future, which is likely to take longer than a few months of digging or organizing. And finally, we do need to point out that for the budget for fiscal year 2026 to have any shot of getting anything done at all 12 appropriation bills have to go through the House and the Senate by the end of July. So what does that mean? Well, as we have pointed out before, it's not good enough for DOGE to uncover fraud or waste. At best, the Trump administration can sequester some of that and hold it in place. But for the funding to be cut, or reabsorbed into the budget and used for other things, Congress is the one that has to act, and DOGE has certain limitations on what they can actually find before that budget process needs to be completed in order to make it into fiscal year 2026. That means that bad government spending has to be identified and then make its way through the congressional budget process. That is the most generous interpretation I can give to this latest report. So where does that leave us? Well, here's where the hard part comes politically. The difficult reality is that the necessary spending cuts were never going to come exclusively from fraud, waste, abuse, and errors, because those are symptoms of a bigger problem and one that has become politically difficult to control. Because the biggest threat to our country is not fraud and waste. It's the arguably legal but incredibly harmful and counterproductive things the government does on an everyday basis. I'm going to read something off for you because, quite frankly, I don't think the vast majority of American citizens understand what it is that their federal government is supposed to be doing. Let me read off the actual authorities granted and enumerated to Congress and therefore the federal government under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, because this is going to blow your mind. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duty, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Now, what does that mean? Yeah, the federal government can collect taxes, but when it says general welfare, it doesn't mean that the federal government can do whatever they want. It means they can do whatever they want within the enumerated powers that they've been granted to them, provided that it's in the general welfare. So what else can they do? They can borrow money on the credit of the United States, and they've sure done a lot of that. They can regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. They can establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. They can coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standards of weights and measurements. They can provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States. They can establish post offices and post roads. They can promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to the respective writings and discoveries. This is things like trademarks, copyrights, and patents. They can constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, which means Congress can establish federal courts under the Supreme Court. They can define and punish practices and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. They can declare war. Gosh, wouldn't that be nice if Congress actually declared war before they sent troops? They can grant letters of marque and reprisal and make rules concerning captures on land and water. They can raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. They can provide and maintain a navy. They can make rules for government and regulation of land and naval forces. They can provide for the calling forth of the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. By the way, Congress, have you seen the southern border? Just checking. They can provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. And they can exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may be part of. They can pretty much govern Washington, D.C. how they want. That's what all that means. And finally, they can make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department thereof, which, by the way, doesn't mean they can do whatever they consider to be necessary and proper. It means they can do whatever is necessary and proper based off of executing the enumerated powers the Constitution is giving them. So why do I read all this for you? Well, because I have a very important question to ask. Did you see anything about a Department of Education? How about managing individual retirement plans for senior citizens? Did you see anything in there about managing your health care? How about printing trillions of dollars to subsidize government spending? Anything specific about subsidizing government's favorite businesses? Anything about redistributing over $1 trillion a year from people who earned it to people who didn't? Anything in there about letting millions of people into the country illegally every year and getting free taxpayer-supported benefits from education to medical care? The answer is no, you didn't. Because it's not in there. And not putting it in there was not an oversight by the founders. It was very intentional, I promise you. But the reality is, with each expansion of federal power, they not only spent our money inappropriately, they created constituencies. And it is the strangest conglomeration of constituencies you've ever seen, from corporate interests to teachers' unions to trial lawyers, the military-industrial complex, pensioners, rent seekers, everything from Wall Street execs to welfare queens have all secured a seat at the federal trough, and they are not about to give up their place. How bad has it gotten? Well, I'll tell you what, you want to try something fun? Ask Grok AI how many federal departments and agencies actually exist. And here's the answer you're going to get. The exact number of federal departments and agencies is tough to pin down because definitions vary and no single authoritative list exists. The U.S. has 15 federal executive departments like the Department of Defense and the Department of Health and Human Services, which have been well established. But beyond that, the count of agencies, including independent ones and sub-agencies, gets murky. Estimates range widely. The United States government manual lists about 96 independent executive units and 220 components within departments. USA.gov cites 137 independent executive agencies and 268 units under the cabinet. Some sources, like the Federal Register, have indexed over 430 entities, including sub-agencies, though that fluctuates. A 2015 administrative conference report noted 115 agencies, but admitted there's no definitive tally. What does all that mean? It means the federal government has gotten so big and exceeded so much of its authority that the federal government can't even tell you how big the federal government is. So yes, you should be very frustrated that we now may be facing the very real possibility that only $150 billion will be cut in time for the fiscal year 2026 budget. But what we need to be truly furious about is that both sides of the aisle have allowed for the massive expansion of federal authority unchecked since the 1920s. That's right. Every single administration from Herbert Hoover to the present has presided over a federal government larger than the one they inherited. Now, I will tell you this much. This is the one administration in my lifetime that I truly believe is still dedicated to perhaps leaving it smaller for the first time in over 100 years. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. To make the real cuts we need to see, not just the ones that would be nice to have, the ones we must have in order to turn things around in this country, Congress needs to hear from us, and they need to hear very loudly that it's not just the fraud or the waste. It's the excessive growth of government that has caused these problems. And we expect Congress to act. Start cutting spending, not just in the obvious areas of fraud, waste, and abuse. Start cutting government departments and agencies that don't need to exist. That is the only way we are going to get the cuts that really matter long term. So let's go back to the original question. Has DOGE admitted defeat? I don't think so. And I certainly hope not, because there is a lot more work that needs to be done. But we all need to be honest with ourselves here. And we need to start getting serious about cutting departments and agencies that shouldn't be there. But until we're willing to do that, until Congress is willing to do that, then we're going to be stuck constantly revising numbers one way or another based off of what we can find with a federal government that more often than not doesn't want to cooperate. Because let's be realistic about something. We are never going to accomplish everything that we wanted in the first 100 days, but a lot has been accomplished. And a lot of Americans are finally starting to see that it's not just that your money was being wasted in the sense of fraud or abuse or errors in payment. No, it was being wasted in the sense that certain ideological entities in this country were using your tax dollars to fund their little ideological projects. And a lot of that has been cut, and we're going to see positive results from that. But the real work to be done includes actually looking at massive areas of the federal government which shouldn't exist, and Congress actually having the courage to cut that. If they're not willing to do this, then this is all kind of a joke. We're going to be able to get at some fraud. We're going to be able to get some waste and abuse. But with a new administration and with new money printing and with new spending bills, it'll all come back over time. This is our opportunity, and DOGE still has a lot of work to do in order to hopefully help the American people see that it's not just about fraud. It's about all the areas of the federal government that need to go away so that we can not only prevent fraud now, we can prevent in the future, and more importantly, we can prevent a federal government actually using its power against the very people whose rights they're supposed to be protecting.